Hi there, and welcome to the Grief and Rebirth podcast. I'm your host, author and trauma survivor Irene Weinberg, here to encourage you wherever you are in your healing journey. In each episode, I chat with incredible grief and trauma specialists, healers, mediums, and celebs, as well as remarkable people who have inspiring healing stories to share. If you're looking for a podcast that's both uplifting and inspiring, you've found it. Let us help you find your joy in life. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds each of you so very well. I'm speaking to you from my studio in West Orange, New Jersey, and I feel incredibly grateful to have this special opportunity to interview an amazing channel of love and healing, whose name is Robin Aisha Landsong. Robin, who will be speaking to us from Mount Shasta, California, is the creative producer of Landsong Studios, a visionary artist, a medicine singer, a medical health intuitive, a craniosacral therapist, a transformational speaker, and a trauma resolution leader. And full disclosure, having recently participated in 3 of Robin's group healing events, I can wholeheartedly attest to the fact that she is a gifted, remarkable healer. When Robin was 8 years old, an American man abducted her from the east coast of the United States and took her to Rhodesia, which is now known as Zimbabwe. When he abandoned her there during the height of the Rhodesian Bush War, Robin was taken in and cared for by the people of a small tribal village. One day, a soldier spotted Robin alone by a river, and he shot her. The bullet grazed her head, and when Robin began to die from blood loss, people from her village found her and saved her life. Sadly, some days later, the soldiers attacked her village. Robin was found unconscious, and she was cared for by the people of a nearby village who took her to a hospital in South Africa, and from there, she was returned to the United States. When Robin was shot, she had 2 near-death experiences. She was called back to life by the medicine song of a rural Zimbabwean woman, which opened Robin to her own medicine songs. And through her own singing medicine, Robin has given healing to over 16,000 people. I'm looking forward to talking with Robin about many things: her early childhood in kidnapping, her 2 near-death experiences, how her life was saved by the medicine song of a rural Zimbabwean woman, the way Robin now utilizes her own singing medicine to help people heal, what she can teach us about forgiveness, and more, for what is no doubt going to be an unforgettable healing interview for all of us. Robin, it is an honor and a privilege to talk with you today. A warm welcome to Grief and Rebirth podcast.
Well, thank you. And thank you for doing your fabulous work in the world and gathering a community of people who are interested in saying, how can we heal together?
That's right. How can we heal, and how can we help other people know that they do not have to suffer, that there are ways that they can choose to grow and heal. So let's start by talking about, which your story is like fascinating. If I didn't know the amazing healer that you also are, just if we could stop at 10 years old, that's a million lifetimes for one person, right? So please tell us about your early childhood, your kidnapping. How were you kidnapped? How were you abandoned? And you were only 8 years old.
Mm-hmm. And so, as many people know, ideally, parents care for their children and give them a sense of protection, a sense of being a worthwhile human being. But sometimes there's that generational disruption, whether it's war or alcoholism or oppression. And so parents lose that ability to that natural mammal instinct to care for their young. So I was growing up in a household with that situation, lots of abuse and abandonment and trauma. And children who don't feel worthwhile are more likely to get abused by strangers. And so this man, it's 1977, it's post-Vietnam War. I believe he was a military trained person. And so he spotted me as an unprotected child, just watched that I walked home from school, and just timed it at the end of the school year. And I literally came inside the school and got me. And immediately I knew my life was in danger. I mean, he was threatening my life, and just his presence had had that kind of violence in just in his presence alone. So it's an odd thing to say that it's almost lucky I already knew how to survive abuse, and that I was already highly intuitive. I could read people. But what was so terrifying about him is that I had trouble reading him and kind of doing my scan of adults of what do I need to become to survive their insanity. And so he drugged me. So I can't say all of the details in terms of the transport. And people often ask, how could somebody take you out of the country? And in 1977, this is well before the human trafficking was really much of a conversation, and people weren't even really watching out for this at all. So it's quite easy at that time to abduct a child, to take them through. There wasn't the security systems, there wasn't people checking, and especially if somebody had a military presence, they didn't get questioned.
Why do you think, what was his purpose in abducting you? What were his intentions towards you? Do you know?
One of my researchers who's helped me kind of piece that time period together, and again, this is kind of theorizing from the information that we have, is that it is possible, and again, I don't have proof of any of this, that if he was a Vietnam vet, that sometimes they fathered a child over in Vietnam, and that generation of children called, born from American soldiers were called war babies. And so when they were deported, they had to leave them behind. And so I think in his mind, he had lost a daughter, and so he was just going to get a daughter.
Wow.
And at one point he said something kind of to me, like very threatening, like, why can't you be more like her?
Oh,
Meaning,
my.
So people often ask kind of questions about his thought process. And I don't think those of us who are reasonably psychologically well can really understand the thought process of somebody who's at that level of psychologically disturbed.
And then he gets you there and he abandons you. What was that about?
So again, the research that I've done, so I've been back to Zimbabwe twice, and I've talked with somebody, and the white government didn't have enough recruits. So they were literally sending out advertisements. And I have a vintage copy of the Soldier of Fortune magazine, and they were literally advertising to get people to come over and fight on their side. And, they'd assist you in getting your plane ticket and getting over there, because they just needed more soldiers. And they purposely targeted people who are already military trained. And so once he had his 5-day training, he had to get rid of me because he had to go into the field. And so I don't think he really had a plan in terms of thinking through, like, oh, once I go into the field, I have to get rid of her. So he gave me to another man, and that man took me on a bus. And it's an interesting moment. And again, I write about this in my upcoming memoir that's not published yet. And the moment he left, he just got in a military truck and drove away, didn't even look back. And on the one hand, I was finally rid of this horrid, dangerous perpetrator, but I also just lost my ride home, in terms of I didn't know where I was. I didn't know how to get back. And he was the only person who knew where I came from. So it was a terrible and great moment of losing him, but just realizing I'm alone in a foreign country, and, he just gave me to this other man, and I don't know where I am.
You've been abandoned so many times. Your family abandoned you from when you were very young in so many ways. And now this man takes you and he abandons you some more. I mean, my goodness, the wounds. Where in the United States were you when he grabbed you, Robin? Where were you living? On the East Coast?
We flew out of the Philadelphia airport.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm given to this other man, and he's a black man. And so we get on a bus, and the bus breaks down, and we're all instructed to get out and walk. But the The abductor had kicked me, so my ribs were broken, and he had gotten me out of the hospital.
Oh my gosh.
And so I can't walk. I can't keep up with the group. And so
Now, the abductor, your original abductor, kicked you, or this new man kicked you?
The original abductor. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting thing sometimes when people are doubtful of my experience, which I understand. If they've just lived in America and they haven't lived through war, it would be hard to relate to. But it's like, I have a broken rib cage. I have, a little groove on the top of my head, and people don't get post-traumatic stress to the level I've had from not having lived through war. So I couldn't keep up on the bus, and the man who I'd been put in his, I put it in quotes, his care, he pushed on my back and he pushed on my broken ribs, so I bit him. And then he just wanted nothing to do with me. It was possible that his assignment was go lose her in the bush and just get rid of her. I don't know. And so he left me behind. And so now I'm in the bush in the height of the Rhodesian War by myself, a white child. And what happens next is a truck full of soldiers comes along, and I think, okay, this is going to be the end. They're fully armed. They're looking at me, and I don't know the political situation, but I do know, I think this might be the end of my 8 miserable years, and it's going to be quick. They're just going to shoot me, and it's going to be the end. But what they did, to my surprise, is they picked me up and put me in the truck with them. And I now know they were heading back to one of the most dangerous places in the war. And when they set me down, 2 soldiers had an argument over me. One wanted to shoot me, and one wanted to save me and care for me. And so my body just said, this is too much stress, waiting to see who wins this argument. And so I went into a state of becoming overly parasympathetic, which can be called parasympathetic shock, and just went unconscious. And that's mercy in the nervous system. And so many trauma survivors, if it's just too overwhelming and the chances of survival are low, our body just does mercy and just kind of takes us out. And so that man who won the argument chose to take me and drop me off near a village he thought would be sympathetic to a white child. And I spent the night in a tree alone. And in the morning, I made my way to that village, and the women were singing while they worked. They were grinding corn and singing. And I had never heard women sing with so much joy and aliveness and presence. And so I crept closer, and then they spotted me, and they were so startled to see a white child alone. And, for those of us who live in these modern times where we have some integration, consider there the racism is so intense that these people had just really very little exposure to white people because there's no mixing. And so they ended up bringing me some food, which was ground corn called mealie meal. And I ate it up, and they brought me water. And of course I hadn't had water in quite some time. And so I was very scared of people. And so I would kind of run away when they brought food to me, but I just watched them, and they didn't come towards me, and they let me come towards them. And that night they kind of brought me some goat skin to cover me up, and I was too afraid to go sleep in the huts, but they just kept welcoming me in. And again, the singing is what really let me know that there was kindness present in them. And in the morning, the children welcomed me into the fire circle. And one of the elder girls started telling a story, and it was in Venda, so I couldn't understand it, but I got the idea that she was telling a story about, and she came to us from far, and she was welcoming me in, storing me into the group. And she started putting black ash on my white skin. And I realized she was making me look more like her and like the other children. And it was the first experience of belonging, of being held in a group, in a community that I'd ever had in my life. And so she was laughing, and I was such a frozen iceberg child. And to see her laughter, her aliveness, I thought, if I stay with these people, maybe I can become alive again. So again, they put black ash on me, on my clothes, on my face, they were touching my more blonde hair then. And so I thought, I can make it if I can stay with these people. And the children ran off, and there was a woman who came over, one of the women who had originally fed me, and she starts singing and calling me over to her. And I'm very scared. She looks very strong. She could beat me. My ribs are all broken on this side, so I'm very defended, very protected. But she's calling me in. And her singing is different than my singing that I do now. But I'm just going to give you a sense of what that feels like to be called in. Oh, hey. And so she's gesturing for me to come closer to her. And continuing to sing to me. And when I stand in front of her, she starts calling me to look into her eyes. And I don't really look adults in the eyes because one, I had so much shame inside me. And two, I was surrounded by mentally ill adults. So I didn't want to get their poison inside of me. But she's calling me over and over again, and she's lifting up my chin to look at her. And so finally, some part of me opens to trust her enough to look her in the eyes. And it's the first time I see mothering. I see somebody who has full intent to care for me, to shelter me. And I literally collapse forward in her arms. Let her be my mama. Let her be my shelter. And so she picks me up and she carries me to the water. And we would go into the water, and she's basically cleansing me, purifying me. I believe she could sense all the hatred that had been put upon me by the abductor, and she's cleansing me, purifying me, and in a way kind of, from a Christian perspective, kind of baptizing me in. And, I'm seeing the black ash come off me in the water. And that night I sleep next to her, and I'm holding onto her clothes because I want to make sure I know right where she is. And I have a feeling that I've been found, I've been welcomed home, and I'm going to be safe as long as I'm with her.
What a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful story, Robin. And what a blessing. I mean, you found an angel. Mm-hmm. You found an angel. When you were shot during the Rhodesian War in 1977, you also had 2 near-death experiences, right? So can you explain what you experienced during each of these near-death experiences? And again, your life was saved by the medicine song. Was it the same Zimbabwean woman? Mm-hmm. My goodness. Mm-hmm. Wow. Can you tell us about that experience?
Yes, definitely. So I wandered too far from the village, and I was going back to where there was a creek that had very positive experience for me, because my mama and another mama had taken me to that river, that creek, and they had undressed me, and then they put clay on my bruised ribs because he had kicked me. My whole back was purple, and my broken ribs were beginning to heal. But they had put clay all over me and then sang to me to get the hatred, from him off my body, so I wouldn't go through life confused by his hatred. And then they called me to sing back to them. And at first I refused. No, I can't sing. But they just kept calling me. And again, when we have people who are showing us what's possible, showing us what life and vitality looks like, it makes it more likely that we can kind of mimic their aliveness. So to my own surprise, I opened my voice and I sang back to them just as they were singing to me. So this creek was a very positive place for me. And so I had wandered back there by myself. And unbeknownst to me, I now, in my research, found out that a battle was starting in the field next to that creek. And so a soldier was scouting the area. And so he was on one side of the creek and I was on my side of the creek. And as soon as he spotted me, he pulled up his rifle. And when his gun barrel became just a circle, I knew that there was no hope for me. And there was no adult to protect me. There was no shelter to run to. And, he already had his full intent. And what was so heartbreaking for me is the people of the village were teaching me that I was valuable, that I was a precious child. And I couldn't understand. He was Black. He looked just like them. And I couldn't comprehend why he hated me so much, why he wanted to erase me. So it was just, seconds before he was so close. I could see his hand pull the trigger, his finger pull the trigger. And again, what people have educated me on since then is that the scopes are meant for longer distance. So what I can put together is he was aiming here, but because he was so close, the scope was off. And that's why the bullet grazed the top of my head. So it blew me off my feet. And when I went down to the ground, I was so disoriented, so startled. And immediately the blood was flowing from my head. And my body, my awareness started to float up above my head. And I could know that if my essence didn't go back into my form, that was going to be the end of me. And what was happening was I was watching kind of the lights go out in me. I was watching my heart get quieter. I was watching my brain turn off. And I just thought, there's nothing I can do but watch this. And then just before the last light in my physical form went out, my awareness that was hovering from above, boom, went into my heart that was now quiet, went out the back of my heart. And I entered into a very big, fast tunnel that transported me very, very quickly. And the beauty that was beginning already was that I was so held. I no longer had to fight to survive. I no longer had to strategize, how am I going to make it out of this alive? Because it was over. And there was a peace and a serenity in having that struggle be over. And this presence that was holding me dropped me off in a new place. And when I had a little bit more awareness, when I could start to see again, there was two sisters and their skin was Black and they were wearing these beautiful yellow dresses. And again, I knew them already. And they were showing me, they gestured to this beautiful golden glowing sphere. And the communication was telepathic. And I knew if I went into that golden glowing sphere, all of me would be totally restored, that there would be complete peace and I would be going home to my source. But I had just found new family. I, for the first time, was being a child that was cherished, and I didn't want to lose my new life. So I started struggling. How can I get back to my life, get back to my new family? And that struggle sent me backwards from that scene. I fell backwards. And when I landed, I was in a new place that was kind of gray and dark, kind of like Ireland on a rainy day. And I was struggling and kind of fighting. And an elder man showed up, and he looked fragile, but he was offering me his arm to help me up. And so I didn't want to have his help, but I let him help me up. And he guided me into a dark cave.
Now, this is in the physical, or in the spiritual yet? This is
in the spiritual.
In the spiritual, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is my first death experience. And he guided me through that cave, and he helped heal my shame, that thinking that there was something wrong with me that made all the abuse happen. And I could see through his eyes. There was nothing about me to fix, nothing about me to change, and that I was okay as I was. And once I understood that there was no shame, nothing to correct about me. And once I understood that, we went out of the dark cave. we went into a cliff. And at this point, I realized he was this divine being that could have gone anywhere, but he came there to help me through my dark cave. So I didn't get lost in avoiding and thinking like, oh, if I fight against the shame inside me, then I won't have to deal with it. But he helped me deal with that, transform it, integrate it. And now my trust in him was absolute. And so again, telepathically, I asked him, where are we going? And he gestured, we're jumping off this cliff together. And I said, wherever you lead me, I will go. So we jumped off this cliff together, and we were like birds going through the night sky. And I've done artwork about my death experience, so I have an image of birds gliding in the night sky. And at a certain point, his time with me was done. And so he allowed me to journey on by myself. But again, there was the golden glowing sphere, now much bigger. And he kind of said it inside, go there, little girl. But again, I had my attachment still to work through of my family. And I saw a field, and I thought maybe my African family is down there. So I landed myself there, and then I became very panicked that maybe that they were hurt or injured, and I had to find them to help them. And so I was running through this grass, and the more panicked I became, the taller this grass became.
Man.
And so I didn't find them, but I thought, I think they're injured. I think they're down, and they might be bleeding just as I was bleeding. And I cried myself clear. And when I was done crying from my concern for them, I heard a rustling in this grass, and I made my way through. And there I met a being who was like the presence of peace. And he had a narrow face and a beard and a sheep herder's staff, and he was wearing a robe. And as I got close to him, he was like the presence of peace. And when I stood before him, all my distress went away. And he began to show me that his face was changing. And his message to me was, it's not the form of myself that matters, it's the connection. And he bent his forehead down to mine, and I could see as he sees. And I saw that we are like, each of us are like gems in this golden matrix, where our loving kindness can connect ourselves closer to one another. So if we need to come home to our connection to ourselves, connection to others, then we can focus on our loving kindness and send that out in this golden matrix. And I understood that even if I lost my African family, I would still be connected to every life form, every frog, every mountain, every tree, and every being with that loving kindness in my own heart. So he stood up, and I could then see him from my own perspective. And again, my trust and my faith in him was absolute. And the message I felt through him is, through me, you can connect to your divine source, your creator. And so I leaned my body, my presence into his presence. And through him, I traveled. And we came out of this portal, and we were looking on my body that was now dead, and I could see that I had bled out. And my African mama had found me, and she had pulled my body up onto her lap, and she was stopping the blood flow with her hand, and she was wailing into the sky. And I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to let her know, I'm fine. I'm free of pain, and I'm here with my guide. And I wanted to comfort her and just have her not be distressed that I'm crossing over, and it's a beautiful thing. So I began to rise up, and as I was rising up, I was going through veils, through layers, and I eventually heard her change her wailing into singing, but I was passing through more and more veils, and I was fully focused on my experience, and I was being purified. Beings were passing through me. And again, any low self-esteem thought that the abuse was my fault was being cleared out of me. And I reached a point where I could begin to see my creator that I call the divine source, the great heart. And I could go home to where I was a seed syllable sung into being by the great heart. And so, but her song was starting to reach me, and I could feel a difference in her song. And I perceived that she called on the ancestors in the land to strengthen her calling song. And again, my song is different than hers, but I'm just going to give you a taste. And I had a choice. I could go back and respond to her calling song, or I could go home to the great heart. And when that song touched me, I remembered I hadn't done my purpose, which was to sing medicine songs to people, to call them home, to say, welcome home to their heart, just as she was doing for me. So that turned me around in the tunnel, and I journeyed back. And before I crossed back to my body, I was at the final veil. And there I met what I consider the grandmother of all of us. And her skin was black. And again, her eyes would change to all races, all colors. And she sang to me as if I was a cathedral. And she was singing this song inside me. And she was transmitting to me, when you go back, it will be so difficult. There'll be more harm and more loss. But I want you to remember that you always belong here. No matter what you have to do to survive, you always belong here to the great heart. And with that, she sung me back through the final veil, and my mama was singing to me, calling me back. And I landed back in my body, and I felt so etheric, like the wind could just blow through me. And so the only place I felt real was where she was touching me. So the more people had gathered, and one of the men gathered me up in his arms and carried me back. And when I looked at his face, he usually had a big, beautiful smile on his face. And I looked at his face, and of course he was so distressed from seeing me, so weak and just barely alive. But again, they took me back, and they were doing prayer, getting the hatred from the bullet off my head. Mm-hmm. And I could read everyone. I knew all their thoughts, all their intent, and their love. And I knew, because they loved me so much, I was going to be okay.
Oh, that is amazing. I want to ask you, first of all, how did you get the specific message that your mission was going to be to sing these medicine songs to people? That was told to you during your near-death experience?
Yes, the last grandmother of all of us. She said, "Go help them remember who they are. Sing to them until they remember." And also, I was shown by another being that there was going to be this art that they were going to give me, and just keep downloading me with all this art. And again, the art was going to be directly from divine source, not through me. I was just to be the humble hands. And they would just keep sending it to me. Once I was safe, they would give me the singing medicine and the images to draw.
Wow. Now, you had 2 near-death experiences, or those 2 together, what you were describing?
Right. So after that, I was cared for, and I was very weak from all that blood loss. There are no hospitals around there. Again, it's the height of the Rhodesian War. So they just cared for me. They didn't take me anywhere because there was no hospital to take me to. And so sadly, 2 days later, the soldiers came back, and I was in a hut when the shooting started. And the other mother, she hid me. When the shooting stopped, she thought it was best to try and make a run for it. And so she had me on her hip and was running, and the soldiers had not left. And so she was shot from behind. We both went down, and me hitting the ground started my bleeding again. And I wanted to be able to pull her with me, but I was 8 and she was yelling at me to keep going. And I was already very weak. I just barely started walking myself. And so she had never yelled at me. So she yelled at me to go. And that's been the hardest thing for me to heal, that I had to leave her behind. And that's taken, I'm not sure I'm actually still healed from that. And so I ran as best as I could. I made it about another 15 steps. And I went down again, face down from blood loss again. I was probably just out of range of the soldier's sight, so he didn't shoot me. And I've been able to retrace my steps. I've gone back twice and retraced my steps. I also know now that I was running on sand, so that's part of why I fell forward. And so I fell forward, and again, just the horrid hissing of my blood pressure being so low. And I, sand in my mouth. And then I crossed over again and had a very different experience. It was just a white landscape. And there was a being that was singing to me. And the song was, "You will live, you will live." So it's like the nursery rhyme of the 3 blind mice. And he was showing me, he showed me this record player. And the record was very scratched. And I thought, this record should just get thrown away because it's damaged. And his great booming voice said, "The woundedness is how I find you. And so that's where the love can get in. The places that were broken open is where we're also broken through, to let divine source kind of rearrange us, re-enliven us." And I said, "Who's speaking to me?" And so I got moved closer to him, and I saw a blue man. His skin was a beautiful purple blue. He had a black bun on his head, and there was all kinds of ornamentation and decoration around him. He was sitting in lotus position, and he was both intimidating and so beautiful. And I knew that with one hand he could create a mountain, and with the other hand he could destroy it. And he showed me these 2 land planes colliding together, rising up to make a mountain. And his message to me was, out of destruction makes new creation. And what he was telling me was, you just lost everybody that you loved, and you are alone in the world. And this looks like there is no future for you. But out of this destruction, I'm going to make new creation for you. And you are part of something that's part of divine plan. And you had to be broken open in this depth, this level, so that you could understand other people's suffering, other people's loss, and grow into a compassion about the ways that human beings get broken down. So he returned me to my body, commanded me to crawl forward, literally commanded me each moment. Like, I didn't want to live. I just lost everyone I love. But he said, "You will get to the well, and in the morning someone else will find you." So he commanded me every crawling forward. Literally, I couldn't get up, so I was just pulling myself forward, pushing with my feet. And in the morning, a woman that I now know, her name is Mia Lucy, she found me barely alive, washed the blood off my face, put me on her back as if I was her own child, took me back to her homestead. And when other people saw that she had a wounded white child, they said, "Don't bother with her, it's too dangerous." Because if she was caught by the white government, she would have been accused of abducting me. If she was caught by the more extreme soldiers, then they would have considered her siding with the enemy. So she hid me. And she also said to those people, "She's a living human being. I won't throw her away." And it is because of her caring, her mothering beyond race, beyond that, she didn't know I was American, that I'm alive. And so most everything I do is to repay her kindness, her courage. I wrote my book for her, and I sing for her. And I got to go back and visit her grave and bow down my head and say thank you and sing to her when her granddaughter was with me. And so Mayamu is her granddaughter, and I've gotten to reunite with her. One of my longer videos on YouTube, shows my reuniting with Mayamu, which was a miracle. that I was able to go back and find her. And she hugged me and she was almost picking me up and she checked my head to make sure I was okay. And it was the most profound reunion moment of my life.
Wow.
And just to have her hold me again 40 years after the war was beyond any other healing. I had to do so much healing to get ready to go back to the place where I'd experienced so much trauma. But having her hold me and love me again there aren't even words to describe it.
There aren't even words, my goodness. Wow, Robin. So now you're returned to the United States. How old were you then? And what was your life like when you returned? Now you go back to another traumatic situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my Emu and her grandmother did take me across to South Africa to give me to the nearest white farming family who said, we'll try and find her family. They didn't know I was American. I think I got an infection and I started to die again. And so they took me to a hospital in Polokwane in South Africa. From there, it was figured out I was American. I was an agent, escorted me back on a flight back to America. My father picked me up in the Philadelphia airport. And again, this is a family of secrecy. This is a family that can't handle, the challenge of what I had been through. And, when so many families don't feel adequate to deal with a traumatic story, they just say, just don't talk about it. And then it never happened. So when I tried to speak of it, my mother hit me and said, don't ever talk about this again. And so I didn't. I repressed it all down. I repressed. And when you repress trauma, you have to repress the good parts too. All of it had to go. And so I suppressed it back down and lived through many more years of very severe abuse in my neighborhood and from my family. And when I was a teenager, my body, just the stress, I started having episodes of just my body just shutting down so much, going so far into parasympathetic. I had no heart rate. I had no breath. I had to be revived again by the AED several times. And once I got to college is when I started my healing process.
I mean, it's amazing with your background that you were even able to go to college, Robin.
My strategy was overachieving. My strategy was to look totally fine, honor student, 3 sports, overachieving, which is a terrible tension. I had to be perfect. And it took me years to allow making mistakes, to allow imperfection. I kind of joke that I was getting some opera training and vocal training, and I forgot my lines. I went up, I was doing a performance and I forgot my lines. And I was like, no, this is a huge accomplishment for me to forget my lines because I'm not perfect. And that's great. So it took me years to relax and not have to hold such a high standard for myself.
But that achievement must have gotten you into college, I surmise. You probably had scholarships or whatever way you went through college, right? And you went through for a bachelor's degree. Did you go further on after that also?
I didn't, because I had so much creative work to do. And honestly, I'm not much of a rule follower. So I've looked at different programs, but I got so much from my death experiences and so much. I've done tons of training, but academia.
You didn't go for the whole 3D college-bound experience.
Yeah, honestly, I couldn't.
You actually graduated beyond that.
Yeah, and to be honest, like professional trainings, because we're craniosacral I have training in polyvagal theory and a lot in interpersonal neurobiology. So I love trainings. Like before COVID, I just was going all over the country. I spent thousands and thousands of dollars in trainings, but professional trainings are a better value than a master's degree, in my opinion, because it actually is teaching real world how to work with clients, and I can get so much training in 3 days that's way less expensive than a master's degree. So I just kind of did the math and figured I'm just going to put this together. And it's challenging because I don't sort of get the credentials behind my name, but when people work with me, they can feel.
Oh, you feel it, So I wanted to ask you, this is a really big question for a lot of people. How were you able with all of this to forgive each of your parents, the man who abducted you, and the man who shot you? And is it possible to forgive a person and choose to detach from them because they're dangerous for you still at the same time? Mm-hmm. How did that come about? And how old were you, and what was going on when you finally were able to work on what they call forgiveness, which is really about you letting it go, not about, you still remember what happened, right? Mm-hmm. So how did that happen for you? I mean, it's miraculous that you were able to do that.
And I like to talk about forgiveness being an outcome of your other trauma resolution instead of necessarily something to aim for, because sometimes people can try to do it too early out of a religious pressure or idea. So I say, do your trauma resolution work, inventory your history, and at some point, there might be a natural inspiration. I basically was motivated because I was so tired of being burnt up by anger. Anger is incredibly valuable in the early stages of our healing because it helps us stand up and say, I'm worthy of being treated well. And anger needs to be present, for women who are in abuse situations, for them to get out. Too much false forgiveness lets people keep tolerating an abusive situation. So that's why I say, let's look at that late stage in healing process and not try to do some concept of generosity when you aren't being treated with generosity. So self-compassion, self-kindness, self-care is getting out of an abusive situation. And so for each person, it was a different process. For my mom, it had to be a very body-oriented process. And it came through actually my menstrual cycles. And so each menstrual cycle, I would have my grief about her life, that she hadn't done her healing work, and that she was so psychologically unwell, and that she alienated her. She definitely alienated me because I left home at 19 and never went back. And just part of my grief about her not doing her healing work motivates me to make it appealing to other people. Like, get started, find your entry point, find your particular avenue. It doesn't have to be psychotherapy. How can movement, dance, community, being of service be our avenue to get to our trauma resolution work, even get started? And we can't do that work by ourselves. With my dad, it was one of my Buddhist teachings. I went to a Buddhist retreat and I had an amazing Tibetan Lama that I went in with the intent, I'm going to sit with my repulsion of my father until it's transformed. And through this Buddhist teaching and just listening to him speak the teachings in Tibetan and then translate to English, literally my body would sweat out this kind of horrid emotional sweat. And I would just have to run out of the room, go take a shower before I could be around anyone. Fortunately, it was a silent retreat. With the abductor, it was EMDR therapy. I just lived in fear. If I even thought about him, I just got filled with terror. And I did an EMDR where in the EMDR therapy, which is that kind of the rapid eye movement going back and forth, my mind got to see him age backwards until he was a distressed infant. And that helped my nervous system feel like he was once vulnerable. He wasn't always this terrifying psychopath. He was once vulnerable, he was distressed. And then kind of my caring mama instinct could change. Instead of being a child terrified by him as a psychopath, I could change the relationship to being a mothering presence to that distressed infant. And then it shifted it for me.
Wow.
And for the man who shot me, that took many layers. At first, as I was rising up in my death experience, I could see him in the generational context of oppression that had happened, and the humiliation that had happened to his father through oppression, and the kind of demasculinizing, which then makes aberrant masculine. And so it was actually at a singing retreat with a teacher whose name I can't recall at the moment. but we did an exercise. There was somebody who was kind of pretending to be a perpetrator, pretending to be the man who shot me. And he was walking around singing, "I love you, Robin Aisha." And my mind accepted it, that in his highest form, he would want to say, "I love you, Robin Aisha." And it just, again, boom, it was this moment I was ready. I cultivated being open to that. And this person stood at just the right angle from which he had shot me. And my whole being shifted. And I no longer needed to be in fear or repulsion or anger. And it was just a different moment from there forward.
Wow. So now you stopped having anything to do with your parents once you reached your adulthood. You've forgiven them, but you know that they're not good for you. So you remain detached. Are they both still alive?
No, they are now both crossed over. And so I can't emphasize that enough. You don't have to be in contact or to speak a word to people to do forgiveness work. Like you said, it is your own purification. It is your own sitting with, abiding with what needs to be seen and finding your unique avenue. Like I said, it was always so much embodiment, and it was a different avenue for each path of forgiveness that I did. But no, I never told them anything about my forgiveness process, and I never discussed it with them. Because I left home at 19. I had very minimal contact with them.
And they wanted everything brushed under the rug anyway. They were, yep. Secrecy was there.
We never discussed. So they never know what happened to me because they just throughout their life pretended that nothing was wrong. I mean,
obviously you disappeared, and was there a reaction? You don't know. You just don't know. Wow. That's amazing. So now you're an adult and you go for training as a craniosacral therapist. And you specialize, what a surprise, in trauma resolution. So how did that help you to heal from trauma? And could you explain to our audience what craniosacral therapy is and how it helps people?
Mm-hmm. And so I waited until I was about 37 before I went to massage school, so that I had enough of my own healing. And I still had to continue much more, and I still always do healing, my own practices to this day. But I wanted to be kind of done enough of my raw trauma content that I felt like my nervous system was regulated enough that I could be of service to others. So I went to massage school and specialized in craniosacral therapy training. And so a quick summary of that is really working with the cerebral spinal fluid, the fluid around the brain, around the nervous system. And that has a rhythm to it, a pulse to it. And when a practitioner is able to perceive that pulse, we're working with the original corrective force of the body. So when we're embryo and we're just developing, the fluids in the body are part of what shape, like the river that shapes the banks. So it's from an embryological perspective, working with the nervous system. So it ends up benefiting brain, organs, and again, our heart has a rhythm, our lymph system has a rhythm, our cerebrospinal fluid has a rhythm, our organs have a rhythm. And when we can come back to that getting coherent, it's like musicians playing well together. And so in my 20 years in practice so far, I have seen the most amazing recoveries from brain injury, organ health, trauma resolution, and people really coming back home to themselves and calming down a nervous system that may have grown up in danger and never known peace in the first place. So one of my favorite teachers, Pema Chodron, she's a Buddhist teacher, and she says, when people are told just relax, that's incomplete instructions. Because if a person grew up unsafe, they don't know how to relax.
Right.
So things like, Qigong, yoga, movement, dance, craniosacral therapy, acupuncture can help people learn how to relax if they have never known peace in their nervous system.
Wow. And you use this craniosacral therapy to help people. It's one of your modalities. It's one of your tools. And full disclosure, I have had craniosacral therapy, and it was very, very helpful to me. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of communication, at least for me, there was with the other side, with information coming in. about my trauma and what I was needing to heal and all of that. So now the other gift you got from your near-death experience is you're also a medical health intuitive. And you see a person's gifts, strengths, and the underlying cause of their physical, emotional, and spiritual distress. How does that look to you, Robin? When you look at someone, how do you see all of that?
Mm-hmm.
See both the pain and the gifts. What does that appear like to you?
And so first I'll say, just as far as like my personality type and kind of how I'm wired, I was born already intuitive. And then so the abuse, having to read adults, and then 5 near-death experiences, it's like, boop, it's totally easy for me. And so from the Myers-Briggs, I'm an INFJ, which means my intuition is my very top strength. So it's easy for me. I can kind of do it all day long. And when I look at people, I see internally. I can see organs, I can see brain, sometimes I see little videos of people's history. And I do want to say, sometimes people get a little concerned, like I can turn it on and turn it off quite well. Like, so I can respect people's privacy. So I do this when I have people's permission. And I can sense and feel, especially when I do the singing medicine, that opens it up and even more. And then since COVID, I shifted to online sessions and I started doing drawings for people. And that's been super fun to also have another avenue to tap in with my intuition and give both of us a visual map of kind of their issues. And I've done a lot of training in attachment trauma and attachment resolution. Again, polyvagal theory, interpersonal neurobiology. So I'm matching my intuition. Boom, I can just see things inside people. I don't see auras, I see internal. And I can also sense and feel their gifts. So it's just as plain to me as looking at their face. And like I say, I have over the years developed an ability to, I can turn it down or I can turn it up.
But what a blessing. But what a blessing, Robin, because many people are not in touch with their own gifts. And you're able to help them to know that. I'll bet many people are very surprised when you talk with them and you tell them, I'm seeing this gift that you have, and they've probably ignored it all their lives. And you probably awaken it in them.
Yes. And the thing I love about being this much of an empath, and then also I have a lot of training in compassion and being compassionate witness, is that when you mirror back somebody's experience, saying it with compassion, then people feel seen and validated. And that's the underlying need of all mammals, of all humans, is to be seen, understood, and say, I care that you're hurting. I care that you've been carrying this all your life. And so just doing that frees people up to do their own healing in their body, in their being, in their nervous system. And of course, what I love to do is call people home to themselves, because when we have trauma, when we have a near-death experience, part of our vitality, I'm not a fan of the term soul loss because I think our soul is fine. I think our vitality can get, either compressed in our body or, it might leave up and out, back behind. And so I'm able to see that also and say, how about we call some of your vitality back into your physical form so your organs can function better, so your relationships, because when somebody is kind of a ghost, other people can't find them to relate to them. And so other people might be dismissive or abusive because they're not sensing the other person's presence is in their body. So it's one of my favorite things to do to help people come back to themselves so they can have more agency, more familiarity with their own body sensation, because that's the place we can say yes or no to what we really want in life.
That's beautiful. And I really want to say, on a little touch of a different subject, you're an INFJ. I am an ENFJ.
I see that.
So it makes total sense. And everyone's going to say, what are they talking about? We're talking about the Myers-Briggs personality test, and it's very enlightening. Tell us about your singing medicine. I know it harnesses the power of the human singing voice. What is that like for you? And what would you like to explain to people about that?
Yeah, so again, this
and it
was
helps
really...
people to heal, Robin. right?
Yes. So it was open to me when my mama sang to me, and then other people in Zimbabwe sang to me. And again, with my voice, I'm allowing divine source just to come through and to say, I see you, you're real, you matter. You're a whole human being, even if you don't feel like it. So what I'm doing is I'm calling on the song that's in the land, which is why my singing sounds different than if I was had been continued to be raised in Zimbabwe. So I'm calling on the song that's in the land underneath of me, and I'm listening to the song that people are born with. Each person's born with a song, and then I just carry certain medicine songs that were gifted to me, and so it's a combination of that. And I'm just dropping in. I can hear it ahead of time before it comes through my mouth. And so when I'm on sacred land or with a person who's really ready, I'm just opening my mouth and breathing in and breathing out. It's that so much of not about me, so much not.
So are you sort of, you're channeling it? It's like you're given the song and you're channeling it. It's coming through you to heal people. And I've been part of a session when you sang to me also, and it was amazing. I want to ask you also, you have an inspiring story about a veteran singing medicine?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I was at a training, a mind-body medicine training at Esalen, and my colleagues were asking me about the singing medicine. I said, why don't I just do it for you? And so we got together. If you've ever been to Esalen, it's like this beautiful ocean view. And so I started singing to this small group. And there was one Iraq vet in the group, and she brought another Iraq vet friend. And that man said, wait right here. I have to get my friend. He needs to be sung to. And so that he brought his friend back who was Iraqi. And I sang to him, and he was so ready to be with his grief. And he was so available and willing to be vulnerable. He went down on his knees and he was sobbing, and I was down on my knees with him. The whole group was crying. And I thought, afterwards, if that had been on film, that could have been so helpful to so many veterans, so many men, to be witness to his willingness to receive. Because so much of what I'm doing is mothering, is caring for, just as I was cared for. And so it became a dream of mine to make a documentary about singing to veterans. And so we are just editing that now. So I found a group in Oakland, California, and they were very receptive, and I went down and sang to them. And it was life-changing for me. You asked earlier about how does this change me? And when I was a girl and abducted by that man, I had no power. I couldn't do anything to help heal him. But as an adult, for me to go back and sing to veterans, having been shot by a soldier, abducted by a soldier, it was like this completing this full circle, and this place where I could now give my healing, my gift. And I didn't know that what I do would be relevant for inner city Black men who are huge veterans. And they loved it. They wept and they leaned into me, and it just broke down my own ideas of like who I can be helpful to. And we interviewed them afterwards, and and again, like this really big dude, he was crying, and he was like, it reminded me of when my grandma sang to me. He could hardly get through the interview. Like I say, it's being edited right now, so it will be out on my YouTube channel soon.
That's wonderful.
And one woman who had been in Iraq said, before Iraq, I sang to my children. When I came back from Iraq, I didn't sing anymore. But today, you singing to me brought something back I lost during being a soldier, and I'm going to sing again. And I thought, I'm good. If I can bring that full circle, and then what else? There's nothing more meaningful.
Wonderful. Robin, the other thing that's occurring to me, and I am such a proponent of people healing whatever modality works for them. That's why there's so many different modalities and healers on my site. But one of the things I think your singing does is sometimes I think the trauma is so horrific that they really can't talk about it, or they really can't process it. And your singing just goes right to the root of it and takes care of that without, it makes it easier for them without them having to go through the other steps. Would you say that's correct?
I would totally agree. And adding in the compassion piece, like I did a compassion training program through Stanford, and that's big medicine. That's all the crux of what we need, because one definition of trauma isn't necessarily the severity of the events that happen. It's, did you have to go through it alone? And so children can go through all kinds of tough stuff. And if they have parents who said, whoa, sweetheart, I'm so sorry, letting me cuddle you up and love you up afterwards, they're not going to have post-traumatic stress, because it's about getting received back and held by the clan, held by the group, held by your mama. And so the singing just brings that right back. It's this mama love, and it just goes right to the nervous system. And I agree with you. Psychotherapy isn't for everyone. It was huge in my healing process. But I don't want people to think that they can't heal if psychotherapy isn't appealing to them. And again,
there are different roads. There are all these different paths and different roads. My whole concept is find your path. Listen to people and what speaks to you for your path. And the other thing you talk about is aligned power, that people fear being powerful. And that also applies to setting boundaries. So could you talk with us a little bit about that, Robin?
So the biggest thing I found in terms of why people are repressed, in addition to the trauma and the attachment trauma, is sometimes we haven't had good role models of what is it like to be in our authentic power. And I had to go through layer after layer, as my intuition became more strong, as the potency in my hands became more strong. At a certain point, I had to wonder, will I misuse this, being able to affect people so much? And then I had to laugh at myself, if I'm that concerned about misusing power, I don't think I have to worry about it, because my intent is to help people, enliven them, empower them.
And you're being conscious. I think you're being conscious and aware.
Mm-hmm. And so when people have been abused as a child, we get this negative association with power is power over instead of power within. And so the way I do my singing medicine, the way I do all my art, write my book, that takes courage. That takes having some guts to stand up and say, yes, I wrote my book. Here it is. I'm, submitting to publishers. And you have to be bold to do that, and kind of outrageously bold sometimes. And so when we can own, the Creator gave me this gift, it's my responsibility to have it show up in the world. It's my responsibility to eat well so that my mind is clear, so I can do my art, so I can write my book, so I can do my things. So taking responsibility for the gifts that we have been given, it is scary. It's not for sissies. And so that's what I love to help people do, and get a redefine. I can be powerful. And a lot of us have in our psyche and our karma what it's been like to be oppressed or killed for being powerful, being a seer, for standing up and having a bold voice. So there's those two elements to do, of the courage to take responsibility for the gifts we've been given, and our karmic history in terms of were we a witch that got taken out for being powerful, being an herbalist?
Yeah, a lot of times it's a lot easier, and I experience this to kind of stay under the radar instead of owning your power. And it's not owning your power over, it's owning just your internal power as to your awareness of who you are and what you can do. And how does this apply to setting boundaries, Robin? Because a lot of people are such people pleasers, and they have the power to protect themselves, and they have the power to advocate for themselves, but they're afraid. So do you have anything you'd like to say to people about that?
So again, coming to that, making sure you're included in the people that you're giving compassion to, that you're being of service to. And in certain circumstances, if you're dealing with somebody who, is kind of trotting on your boundaries, to make yourself the person who you're taking care of in this situation, which might mean leaving the room, which might mean leaving the marriage, which might mean leaving the workplace. And And so that self-compassion piece, along with embodiment, so you can feel like, if somebody says something rude or mean, you can feel it right away in your body and be like, you know what? I'm not up for that. That's not interesting to me. It's boring to me, and I'm gone. And so being able to feel your yes and your no, feel yourself as self-worth, then it helps it make it easier to discern. And when we can give a clear message for somebody, and here's a great way to set boundaries that I've learned, is just, I don't like that. It doesn't require an explanation. You're not psychoanalyzing them. You're not saying like, oh, you're doing that because of your attachment trauma and your unresolved trauma, so therefore I'm going to leave. It's like, whoa, that gets all kinds of arguments.
Right, too woo-woo.
Yeah, or, too neurobiology based. But just to say, I don't like that. I didn't like to be spoken to that way. It's non-negotiable. It's subjective. It's your subjective.
But if the person says to you, too bad, I'm still going to do this, then you have a choice to detach and leave. Bye-bye. Right. Is however you can manage to do that.
Right.
You speak about the dangers of us, them thinking, and that makes someone else the other. And I think that this is almost like a pandemic all over the world of this us, them thinking, what of the other. What would you like to say about that? I mean, with your experience, my goodness.
Yeah. And so again, when Mia Lusa found me, she could have just left me.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, she's part of the humanity that I'm going to help. And she said, she's a living human being. I'm not going to throw her away. So she did the opposite of othering me. She welcomed me, and she took care of me, and she hid me. And so there's this core foundation in my worldview and who I am. How can we be welcoming to others? And again, we need to do our own trauma resolution work to be welcoming to ourselves so that we have the capacity to extend compassion. And again, when I was in my Stanford training, empathy is kind of being with the suffering of another, and that we can get kind of spun or get empathy distress from that. Compassion is a more stable place, moving over into what are the ways that I can be of service to reduce the suffering of another. Sometimes we can't do physically anything. Sometimes we can't be Red Cross and go in and pick somebody up and take them out of a situation, but we can be witness. And so, like I send singing prayer to Ukraine. I send singing prayer when I, pass a car accident. I stop my conversation and I just do prayer for that person at that moment. So us being attentive, mindful in our own life increases our capacity to be welcoming to one another. And when we haven't done our trauma resolution, our limbic brain is more likely to categorize somebody as unsafe. And Bessel van der Kolk has a very powerful, totally content-filled book, The Body Keeps the Score. And he goes through a very careful laying out of when we are hypervigilant, we are quicker to see danger that may be kind of minor, or maybe something we could work through with that person. But our nervous systems are looking for welcome or warning. And when we haven't done our work yet, our limbic brain is hypervigilantly scanning for how could this person look like a perpetrator that has harmed me before? How can I associate that? One of my other colleagues talks about overcoupling. For me, like I was abducted by a white man, I was shot by a black soldier. I could overcouple those things and then never have relationships with men at all. But I have uncoupled those things so that I can see a person and meet them as they are now. And that I don't just immediately viscerally have a response.
You don't put them in the same basket. All
Yes.
people, it's like the stereotypes, all people are like this or all people are like that. You're able to see the essence of the person.
Right, and that's a brain event. Frontal is able to think that through. Limbic overcategorizes. So again, when we feed ourselves well, when we do exercise, we're taking care of our brain health.
Wow. And Robin, this is fascinating. And you speak to this. Please explain to everyone how trauma or healing can be passed down through generations? And how are our various relationships affected when we grow and heal? I have my own stories about this, but I'd really like to hear from you about that, because you grow up in a family, and really what you're going through is the history of every single thing that has happened to them. So yes, which happened to you, and it also happened to me in my life. But on the other hand, I have experienced also that as you heal, it also affects relationships. So would you like to speak to that?
There's a really great teacher who does kind of ancestral healing ceremony, Melodoma Somé. And he has a great term that he's coined called ancestralized, meaning like even once our elders have crossed over, spiritually, is there clarity? And so there's different programs that suggest, can you tap into your well ancestors before the war, before the famine, before the oppression? And when we look back, if we go far back in our family tree enough, on some place, there's going to be some place where our ancestors have been the oppressor or have been the oppressed. So nobody really has the total corner on the market of like having just been oppressed. So were our ancestors the initiator of war or the sufferers of war? So going back to that well ancestor who has done their spiritual work, can we call on them to say, can you please help the disruption, the place in generationally where the alcoholism started? And the more I do this work, and last time I did the math, I've done about 16,000 sessions, probably more than that by now, is that war is the crux of so much suffering. So much dysfunction in families is when the people who fought in it come back different or don't come back. And what's the gap? I went to a conference in South Africa and was talking with a woman who, during apartheid, they lost so many people from the violence in apartheid that they had 6 people at their table before apartheid. And then by the end of apartheid, they had 2 people left at their dinner table because of the violence. Like, how do people heal from?
Well, think about the Holocaust. I mean, yes. there are, I know people who are children of Holocaust survivors, and the anxiety, the trauma has passed through into them.
Yes. And when I've worked with children of Holocaust survivors, like, being able to differentiate their nervous system, because if they have a parent who's, can't even get started in the healing process, then the research shows that next generation has so much more organ problems, so much more autoimmune diseases, so much more anxiety that they don't know where it comes from. So Adyashanti has a great phrase that I love, is that these unresolved things, these unwitnessed traumas, again, resolving trauma is about having companionship, having somebody say, I see you, I understand that this was so painful, the disorienting, the loss was so strong, and having that compassionate witness can go a long ways. And, and then I love things like EMDR therapy, and it's amazing, amazing technique.
Now, when someone uses one of these wonderful modalities and they start to heal, how does that affect the family system? Say you've got a family system that's mired in the dysfunction with the ancestral legacy, and then one cog in that wheel decides that person decides that they're going to do their healing work. How does that affect the people that are still in the system?
Mm-hmm. And that's an intriguing question. And I think the best way to find out is to try it out, is to be that cog in the system that does the healing. And it's surprising the people who will want to come closer and the people who will move further away from you. And the research shows that the best, like when we are no longer ambivalent about healing, and we make, our commitment, and we increase our confidence that we too can heal. Because at this point, when I have stuff come up, I'm completely confident that I can work through it. I know how to shake, I know how to have grief, I know how to do these things. So it's like, okay, in 20 minutes, I might feel different than I do right now. In 2 hours, I can shift this. So confidence is the biggest factor to moving from ambivalence to commitment. And so when other people around you see, oh, they worked through that and their confidence has grown, so the next distressing life thing that comes up, when we have the confidence, I can grieve, I can be angry, I can feel sad, and I'm not going to avoid it, I'm not going to fight it, then other people are going to say, oh, either I want to come closer and find out how you did that, or you're pushing on my denial and pushing on my avoidance, and I'm going to make you the bad guy.
Right.
And I'm going to find a reason to get away. And I'm going to blame you on as I go out the door.
Right. I think what you're doing, and I'm asking the question because I did it in my family. I was the person to break the legacy in my family. And some people stayed behind and other people have said, oh, I want some of what you're doing. And I see the relief. So I think that when you, and it's not easy to have the courage to heal and stand up against all those family systems and those thoughts and all. But when you do it, I think you're seeing the possibility in others and they have choice as to what they want to do.
Mm-hmm. Right? And I think the willingness to leave that family system is a energetic statement of, I'm actually not going to keep tolerating this.
No, we're out of here.
Mm-hmm. And I like to tell people that it's okay. We don't actually owe anything. I didn't go back for my mom's funeral. I didn't even get invited to my dad's, and that's okay with me because I did my own ceremony with people who are safe. So when we are ready to be willing to give up belonging to an unhealthy clan, then we can do all kinds of things.
Yeah.
When we're ready to say, I'm going to choose. I mean, I have friends that are the people in my life and not, I'm not adhering to systems that honestly, I'm too big, I'm too healthy for.
Right. Well, you get to now choose your own tribe.
Yes.
You totally, I'm in the same position. I get to choose my own tribe now. I don't really want to go back to the old hurtful ways of being. And you are so wonderful. And I'm sure that people listening are like, oh my goodness, I want some of what they are talking about. So would you like to describe for everyone your various online healings? And would you like to talk to us about which I am looking forward to interviewing you about your upcoming memoir, your docuseries, and you're even setting some of your medicine songs to music. And keep going, Robin, just fill us in.
Yes. One of my colleagues says, when you transform trauma energy, it becomes creative energy. So I laugh at myself sometimes. I have friends who help me go out and play because I have so many creative ideas that I'm working on so many projects at once. So yes, I am recording my singing medicine. I have found the sound engineer. We're adding some accompaniment to it, and there'll be more of that. And I have an art deck coming, actually a 2.
Now tell us about the art deck. What's the art deck?
Yeah, so one will be on trauma resolution that will go with my trauma resolution book, and then another will be on empowerment and purpose and making meaning. And
sounds like a wonderful gift to give someone.
Yes. And
wonderful.
I have so much art.
Oh my goodness. And I've seen some of it and it's wonderful. And what about your docuseries?
Yes, that's a longer term project. It's about just what we were talking about. There's so many ways to heal and inspiring people and just showing what does dance look like? What does me singing to veterans look like? And what are all the pathways to come home to embodiment? What does eating well look like? And so it doesn't matter to me where people get started, if they can just shift from that ambivalence to some level of self-commitment, whether it's about cleaning up your diet, getting a non-inflammatory diet, whether it's about busting out your creative things with your kids. And the beauty of doing all this creativity is behind me is my artwork made into a blanket. And so you can do all kinds of things. And the more we do our creativity, the more we do our healing, the more we can be of service. And then it just becomes exponential. It's so much fun to help other people heal. So currently I'm doing 5-person groups online and classes online. At certain points, I might need to take little sabbaticals from that to to work on my bigger projects and get things actually out in the world. So, but that's a current offering that you can find on my website.
Think about what you went through and how you are turning. I mean, turning lemons into lemonade does not do your story justice, Robin. I mean, it's amazing, and what you've been through, and now you have a life where you can experience true joy, where you didn't even think you were going to be alive, and all of that happened to you. So, what is the Robin Aisha Landsong tip for finding joy in life?
That's such a great question. I'm feeling into it in my body. So, your breath, meditation, movement, nourishment, all comes back to coming home to your body sensation. And yeah, how many thousands of hours have I been in meditation?
What type of meditation? Is there a particular type of meditation that you?
I've done different things through the years. You know, one, being a craniosacral therapist, that puts me into delta brain state. So at some point I was like, I spend about 15 hours a week in delta brain state when I had my active practice. And so I currently do a meditation where I focus on breathing about 5 breaths in and out through each of my chakras all the way down. And I actually don't have any earth signs in my astrology, so I need to ground down all the time. It's like super easy for me to be expansive, and I have to root chakra, second chakra. That's why the movement and the dance and the touch is all so key. So embodiment, coming home to
embodiment. Mm-hmm. And I think that's that's an extension of self-love. Because for me, when they pulled me out of the car and I got that message in my head that said, be loving, a voice came into my head and said, be loving and kind to everyone. I took that to be, that means me too. Mm-hmm. And so a tip for finding joy in life is to actually allow yourself, would you agree? Mm-hmm. To be loving and kind, not only to others, but to yourself, and embrace yourself and be able to have those moments. And joy and sorrow can exist at the same time.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And the further I got in reducing the trauma content in my nervous system, the easier it got to do self-care. Like, you know, when I was this full, I would eat things that were going to cause pain in my body. And, you know, now that the ratio is this way, it's like, I say I'm living a pleasure-filled life. And I don't want that to be short-term gratification food. I want that to be food that's nourishing and yummy and healthy. And I'm going to feel good 5 hours later. My joints aren't going to hurt. You know, my skin's not going to hurt because of what I ate. And so yeah, I eat a really, really super clean diet. I haven't had sugar in 9 years. I don't eat wheat, dairy, corn, and I'm happy.
And you're happy and you're feeling well. And if there was anyone on this planet who deserves to be happy and feeling well, Robin, it's you. I want to thank you from my heart for sharing your incredible story with our Grief and Rebirth podcast audience today, and for being the amazing channel of love and healing who you are. Mm-hmm. It's an honor and privilege to talk with you. And already looking forward to doing it again with all the new things that are going to be coming into your life when that time is right. And here's a loving reminder, everyone, that you can see the show notes and all Grief and Rebirth podcast episodes on ireneweinberg.com. And make sure to follow us and like us on social at Irene S. Weinberg on Instagram, Facebook, wherever you find your social media. As I like to say, and it really applies when it comes to Robin, to be continued, many blessings. Mm-hmm. Bye for now. And thank you, Robin, so much.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. And can we close with me singing to you?
Sure. Please do.
All right. So again, I'm asking myself, what's medicine for you right now? So
And that I felt joy. Thank you so, so much.
You are welcome.
So much from my heart. All right, everyone. All I can say is this has been amazing, and we will be back, Robin and I, to be sure. Thank you all so very much. And thanks again, Robin, from my
honor.
heart.